The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the most beautiful place in the known universe. It floated at the heart of Nexus Prime Station, a massive structure built in the empty space between three dying stars. The chamber itself was a perfect sphere of crystalline light, and 12 thrones made of rare metals sat in a circle at its center. On these thrones sat the leaders of the 12 elder species. They had ruled the Orion arm of the galaxy for 60,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched young species crawl out of their home worlds and reach for the stars. And they had decided, long ago, that they knew best how the galaxy should be run. High Arbiter Velthrix of the Sindari hegemony was the oldest among them. His species looked like tall, thin insects with 6 arms and 8 eyes. His shell was the color of old bronze, and he had lived for 900 years. He had seen many things in his long life. He had seen wars that burned entire star systems. He had seen plagues that killed billions. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. On this particular day, the council was meeting to discuss routine matters, trade agreements, border disputes, the usual boring business of running a galaxy. Velthrix listened with half his eyes closed, his mind wandering to other things. "The next matter concerns the human protectorate," said the secretary, a small creature with gray skin and large black eyes. Velthrix made a sound of annoyance. Humans. Such a troublesome species. They had been discovered 200 years ago on a small blue planet called Earth. At first, the council had been curious about them. They were unusual creatures. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons. Their bodies were soft and weak. They could not survive in extreme temperatures. They could not breathe underwater. They could not fly. And yet they had somehow become the dominant species on their planet. They had built cities and machines. They had split the atom and walked on their moon. The council's scientists had studied them and made a disturbing discovery. Earth was what they called a death world. It was a planet filled with danger. Earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, floods. The weather changed constantly. Diseases spread everywhere. Predators hunted in every environment. Most species would have died on such a world. But humans had not died. They had survived. They had thrived. They had conquered their planet not through strength or speed, but through something else. Something the council did not fully understand. Still, when the council first made contact with humanity, they saw only weakness. Humans lived short lives. They fought among themselves constantly. They were divided into hundreds of nations that could not agree on anything. The council decided that humans were useful but not important. They gave Earth protectorate status, which meant that humans would be protected by the elder species in exchange for resources and labor. It was a polite way of saying that humans were now servants. For nearly 200 years, this arrangement worked. Human workers were sent to mining colonies throughout council space. Human scientists helped with research projects. Human soldiers were recruited into the armies of various elder species. The humans complained sometimes, but they did as they were told. Then came the trouble on Kepler 442b. Kepler 442b was a human colony world on the edge of council space. 50 million humans lived there, farming the land and mining the mountains. It was a hard life, but the colonists had built something they were proud of. They had schools and hospitals. They had families and dreams. And then they made a mistake. They asked for independence. The request was polite. The colonial governor sent a formal petition to the council, asking for Kepler 442b to be recognized as a free human world. He offered to continue trade with the council. He promised friendship and cooperation. He simply wanted his people to rule themselves. The council's response was immediate and brutal. High Arbiter Velthrix remembered the meeting where they had decided what to do. Some council members had wanted to negotiate. Others had wanted to ignore the petition. But Lord Krathax of the Rithkari Dominion had spoken loudest. "We cannot allow this," Krathax had said. His species were massive creatures, like walking mountains of gray stone. They had ruled through fear for 30,000 years. "If we let one protectorate species demand freedom, others will follow. We must make an example." The council had agreed. They authorized the Rithkari Dominion to conduct a pacification campaign against the human colonies. It was a clean word for a dirty business. The Rithkari fleet arrived at Kepler 442b 3 weeks later. They did not negotiate. They did not warn. They simply opened fire from orbit. The cities burned. The farms became craters. 50 million people died in a single day. But the Rithkari were not finished. They moved to 2 other human colony worlds and did the same thing. By the time the campaign was over, 3 worlds were dead. 18 million humans had been killed. The council expected tears. They expected begging. They expected the humans on Earth to fall to their knees and promise to never cause trouble again. This was how young species always reacted when the elder races showed their power. Instead, something strange happened. Earth went silent. At first, the council thought it was grief. Humans were emotional creatures. Perhaps they needed time to mourn. A year passed. Then 2. Then 5. No human ships left the Sol system. No communications came from Earth. The human workers in council space finished their contracts and went home. The human soldiers quietly resigned from alien armies. The council sent messages to Earth. There was no response. They sent diplomats. The diplomats were turned away at the edge of the Sol system by automated defense platforms that had not existed before. Some council members grew worried. "We should investigate," they said. "Something is happening on Earth." But Velthrix had waved away their concerns. "They are a broken species," he had said. "They are hiding in their little system, licking their wounds. In another generation, they will forget their anger and return to their place. This is how it always happens." The other council members had believed him. After all, Velthrix was 900 years old. He had seen this pattern many times before. Young species always submitted in the end. It was the natural order of things. Now, sitting in the grand chamber on this ordinary day, Velthrix was thinking about lunch when the doors burst open. A communications officer ran into the chamber. He was a young Sindari, and his eyes were wide with fear. His whole body was shaking. "Hi, Arbiter," he shouted. "Emergency transmission from the outer sensors." Velthrix felt the first cold touch of worry. In 600 years of service, he had never seen anyone run into the grand chamber. It was simply not done. "What is it?" he demanded. The officer's voice trembled. "Ships, High Arbiter. Thousands of ships. They are coming out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus system." "What species? Is it the Void Raiders? The Machine Collective?" The officer shook his head. "No, High Arbiter. The ships, they are human. The humans are coming." For the first time in 900 years, High Arbiter Velthrix felt fear. The quiet was over. The storm had arrived. 5 years earlier, on the day the news arrived from Kepler 442b, the world stopped. Admiral Yuki Tanaka was in her office in Tokyo when the reports came through. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that had seen too much. She had spent 30 years in the Japanese Maritime Defense Force, rising through the ranks until she commanded the Pacific Fleet. She was known as a calm woman, someone who never lost her temper. When she saw the images from Kepler 442b, she broke a coffee cup in her hand, without noticing. The footage had been captured by a civilian transport ship that had escaped the attack. It showed the Rithkari fleet in orbit around the colony world. It showed the plasma beams raining down from the sky. It showed the cities melting. It showed the forests burning. It showed 18 million people dying in fire and pain. Tanaka watched the footage 3 times. Then she watched the Council's official statement, in which High Arbiter Velthrix called the massacre a necessary correction, and warned other protectorate species not to forget their place. Something changed in Tanaka that day. Something changed in everyone who saw those images. For as long as anyone could remember, humanity had been divided. Nations fought over borders. Religions fought over beliefs. Corporations fought over money. Politicians fought over power. It seemed like humans would never agree on anything. But on that day, 18 million deaths united the human race in a way nothing else ever had. Within a week, the leaders of every nation on Earth met in an emergency session of the United Nations. There were no arguments. There were no debates. There was only one question. What do we do now? The answer came from an unlikely source. General James Morrison, the commander of the United States Space Command, stood before the assembly with a folder of classified documents. "For 20 years, he said, we have been studying the alien technology we received through our protectorate agreement. We were supposed to use it only for approved purposes. We were supposed to share everything we learned with the Council. We did not." He opened the folder and showed them the designs. Secret shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt. prototype weapons that improved on alien technology by factors of 10, engine systems that could outrun any ship in the Council fleet. "We have been preparing for this day," Morrison said. "We just did not know it would come so soon." The vote was unanimous. Earth would go dark. All communications with the Council would stop. All human workers would be called home. And behind a wall of silence, humanity would build a fleet. Admiral Tanaka was chosen to lead the project. She moved to a secret base on the dark side of the moon, where the largest shipyard in human history was being constructed. For 5 years, she worked without rest. She barely slept. She barely ate. She had one goal: to build a weapon that would make the galaxy tremble. The work was hard, but humans were good at hard work. Factories across Earth ran day and night, producing ship components that were secretly launched into orbit. Scientists worked in hidden laboratories, improving alien technology in ways the Council had never imagined. Soldiers trained in zero-gravity combat facilities, learning how to fight in the cold darkness of space. The Council had made a terrible mistake. They had shared their technology with humanity, thinking that humans were too primitive to understand it. They had not realized that humans were perhaps the most adaptable species in the galaxy. Humans did not just copy things, they improved them. Where alien ships used standard plasma weapons, human engineers developed singularity cannons that could tear holes in space itself. Where alien shields followed predictable patterns, human scientists created adaptive barriers that learned from every attack. Where alien engines were efficient but slow, human designs sacrificed safety for speed, pushing ships to velocities that would kill most species. The aliens had also forgotten something important about Earth. For 10,000 years, humans had been at war with each other. They had invented countless ways to kill. They had developed strategies and tactics that no peaceful species could imagine. They had fought in trenches and jungles, in deserts and mountains, in the air, and under the sea. War was not new to humanity. War was what humans did best. By the 4th year, the fleet was taking shape. 1,200 warships hung in the darkness beyond Mars, hidden by a network of cloaking satellites that the Council did not know existed. The smallest ships were frigates, fast and deadly, packed with missiles and point defense systems. The largest were dreadnoughts, massive vessels carrying weapons that could crack planets. The flagship was named the UES Retribution. It was 2 kilometers long, armored with layers of adaptive plating, and armed with weapons that had never been tested in actual combat. Admiral Tanaka made it her home. She walked its corridors every day, speaking with the crew. They were young men and women from every nation on Earth: Americans and Chinese, Russians and Indians, Europeans and Africans. They had grown up hearing stories about the massacre. They had joined the Navy knowing they might die. "Are you afraid?" Tanaka asked a young pilot one day. The pilot shook his head. "No, Admiral. I am angry." Tanaka nodded. Anger was good. Anger would keep them fighting when fear told them to run. In the 5th year, the fleet was ready. The crews had trained. The weapons had been tested. The strategies had been planned. All that remained was to choose the moment. It came on a cold morning in January. Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking at a holographic map of the galaxy. The Council's forces were spread thin, as they always were. They had grown lazy and complacent over the centuries. They did not expect trouble from their protectorates. "Admiral," said her first officer, a tall German named Klaus Weber, "all ships report ready. The Soul Barrier is standing by to drop on your command." Tanaka took a deep breath. In a few hours, she would either be a hero or a corpse. Either humanity would win its freedom, or it would be wiped from existence. There was no middle ground. She thought about the 18 million dead. She thought about the children who had burned on Kepler 442b. She thought about the Council's smug faces as they called the massacre a correction. "Drop the barrier," she said. "All ships, engage engines. Set course for the Nexus system." "Admiral," Weber said quietly, "once we do this, there is no going back." Tanaka's eyes were cold. There was never any going back. They made sure of that when they burned our worlds. The Soul Barrier fell. The cloaking satellites shut down. For the first time in 5 years, the Council's sensors could see the Sol system clearly. What they saw would haunt them forever. 1,200 human warships moved as one, their engines blazing with blue fire. They entered hyperspace in perfect formation, disappearing from Sol and reappearing at the edge of Council space. The journey that should have taken months took only hours. Human engines were faster than anyone had believed possible. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humanity too far. Admiral Tanaka sat in her command chair, watching the stars blur past her viewport. Her fleet was an arrow aimed at the heart of the Council, and when it struck, nothing would ever be the same. "Time to target?" she asked. 6 hours, Admiral. 6 hours until the reckoning. 6 hours until humanity showed the galaxy what it truly was. Tanaka smiled for the first time in 5 years. It was not a pleasant smile. "Good," she said. "Let them see us coming. Let them feel what we felt. Let them know that their time is over." The human fleet flew on, unstoppable, carrying the anger of an entire species toward its destiny. Sensor technician Krill X was having an ordinary day. He sat at his station in the monitoring corps headquarters, watching the screens that tracked ship movements throughout Council space. It was boring work, but Krill X did not mind. He was young for a Sindari, only 120 years old, and he still believed that boring days were good days. He was thinking about his evening meal when the first alarm went off. Krill X looked at his screen and felt his heart stop. Ships were appearing at the edge of the Nexus system, dropping out of hyperspace one after another. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. "That cannot be right," he whispered. He ran a diagnostic on his sensors. They were working perfectly. The ships were real. His supervisor, an older Sindari named Vrathal, hurried over. "What is happening?" "Ships," Krillix said. "Many ships. Coming from. I do not recognize the hyperspace signature." Vrathal leaned over the console, his 8 eyes narrowing. Then his eyes went wide. "That is the Sol signature. Those are human ships. Impossible. Humans do not have ships like this. Humans have only transport vessels and a few patrol craft." "Then explain what I am seeing." Krillix could not explain it. According to his sensors, 1,200 warships were now in the Nexus system. They were moving fast, much faster than Council ships could move, and they were heading straight for Nexus Prime Station. The alert went out across Council space. Emergency sessions were called. Leaders were woken from their sleep. Military commanders rushed to their command centers. Within an hour, the entire Council was gathered in the Grand Chamber, staring at a holographic display of the incoming fleet. High Arbiter Velthrix stood before his throne, his bronze shell trembling with emotions he had not felt in centuries. Fear, confusion, and underneath it all, the first cold touch of regret. "How is this possible?" demanded Lord Krathax of the Rithkari Dominion. His stone body seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than it had been 5 years ago when he ordered the destruction of the human colonies. "Our intelligence said the humans were broken. Our spies said they had no military capability. Your spies were wrong," said Ambassador Thessia of the Velnari Collective. She was a small creature with blue skin and large silver eyes. Her species were known for their wisdom, and right now, her wise eyes were filled with fear. Or perhaps the humans wanted us to believe they were broken. 5 years, Velthrix said quietly. "They spent 5 years preparing this, building this fleet, and we saw nothing." The chamber was silent. On the holographic display, the human fleet moved closer with every passing second. "How many ships do we have in the system?" Velthrix asked. 800, replied the military commander. "But we are sending out emergency calls to all nearby fleets. We can have 3,000 ships here within 2 hours. 3,000 against 1,200, Krathax said. "We outnumber them almost 3 to 1. This will be over quickly." Some of the council members seemed relieved by this. Velthrix was not. He had studied humans long ago, when they were first discovered. He remembered reading about their history, the wars they had fought against each other, the horrors they had committed, the impossible victories they had won against superior enemies. "Do not underestimate them," he warned. "Humans are not like other species." Before anyone could respond, a new alert sounded. An incoming transmission, broadcast on all frequencies. "They want to talk," the communications officer said. "Should I accept the transmission?" Velthrix nodded. A moment later, a human face appeared on the main screen. It was a woman with gray-streaked black hair and eyes that held no warmth. She wore a dark uniform with symbols that Velthrix did not recognize. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Navy," the woman said. Her voice was calm and cold, like ice forming on still water. 5 years ago, you murdered 18 million of our people. You burned our colonies. You killed our children, and you called it a correction. She paused. The council members shifted uncomfortably on their thrones. You believed we would accept this. You believed we would kneel. You believed we were weak. Tanaka leaned forward, and something terrible burned in her eyes. You were wrong. We are humanity. We do not forget. We do not forgive, and we have very long memories. Admiral Tanaka, Velthrix said, trying to keep his voice steady. Let us discuss this. Let us negotiate. Surely there is a way to resolve this conflict without further bloodshed. For a long moment, Tanaka simply stared at him through the screen. Then she smiled. It was the most frightening smile Velthrix had ever seen. You had 5 years to negotiate. You had 5 years to apologize. You had 5 years to bring those responsible for the massacre to justice. Instead, you did nothing. You waited for us to submit. You waited for us to forget. She shook her head slowly. There will be no negotiations, High Arbiter. There will only be consequences. The transmission ended. The chamber erupted in chaos. Council members shouted at each other. Military commanders screamed orders into their communication devices. Guards rushed to defensive positions. Alarms blared throughout the station. Velthrix stood still in the middle of it all, watching the holographic display as the human fleet grew closer. He thought about everything he knew about humans, their short lives, their emotional nature, their tendency toward violence. He had always thought of these traits as weaknesses. Now he wondered if he had been wrong. High Arbiter, the military commander said. Our fleet is ready. The reinforcements will arrive in 90 minutes. Do we engage? Velthrix looked at the human ships on the display. They moved with perfect coordination, like a single living creature. No wasted motion. No hesitation. They knew exactly what they were doing. Yes, he said finally. Engage. Destroy them all. The council fleet moved to intercept the humans. 800 ships against 1,200. But reinforcements were coming. 3,000 ships from across council space, racing toward the Nexus system. On paper, the numbers were clear. The council would win. They had to win. They had the ships, the experience, the technology of 60,000 years of space travel. But as Velthrix watched the human fleet approach, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Doubt. Humans had crawled out of the mud on a death world. They had survived ice ages and plagues. They had conquered their planet not with strength or speed, but with something else, something the council had never understood. Determination. Fury. The absolute refusal to accept defeat. The first shots were fired. Bright lines of plasma and energy crossed the space between the fleets. Ships exploded. Metal burned. The Battle of Nexus Prime had begun, and as the first human ships crashed into the Council's defensive line, Velthrix realized something terrible. This was not a battle. This was a reckoning. The humans had come to teach the galaxy a lesson, and that lesson was written in fire and blood. Velthrix sat down heavily on his throne and watched the display. All he could do now was hope that his fleet would survive long enough for the reinforcements to arrive. But deep in his heart, he already knew the truth. The reinforcements would not arrive in time. The Council fleet would not win, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The humans had come for their revenge, and nothing in the universe could stop them. Commander Tharlox of the Rithkari battleship Crusher of Worlds had fought in 47 battles over his 600-year career. He had seen fleets broken. He had seen planets fall. He had never seen anything like this. The humans did not fight like any species he had ever faced. Standard space combat was simple. Fleets formed lines. They fired at each other from long range. They used shields to absorb damage and slowly wore each other down. It was a game of numbers and patience. The bigger fleet usually won. The humans ignored all of these rules. They came in fast, impossibly fast. Their ships moved at speeds that should have killed their crews. Tharlox watched in disbelief as human frigates dove through his defensive formation, spinning and rolling to avoid fire while unleashing missiles in all directions. How are they doing that? He demanded. No living being can withstand those maneuvers. His science officer checked his readings twice before answering. They are cushioning themselves somehow. Some kind of gel-filled suits. And their bodies, they seem to handle high forces better than most species. Tharlox did not understand. The Rithkari were made of living stone. They were the strongest beings in the galaxy, and yet these soft, fragile humans were flying circles around his ships. All batteries, concentrate fire on the lead human vessel, he ordered. The Crusher of Worlds was one of the most powerful ships in the Council fleet. Its plasma cannons could melt asteroids. Its missiles could crack moons. When all its weapons fired at once, nothing could survive. The lead human frigate exploded in a ball of fire. Tharlox allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then 5 more frigates took its place. They came from above and below, from left and right. They swarmed around the Crusher of Worlds like angry insects, their weapons hammering against the Rithkari shields. The shields held, but Tharlox could see the power readings dropping. Where did they learn to fight like this? He whispered. The answer, if he had known it, was simple. Humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other. They had invented more ways to kill than any other species in the galaxy. They had developed tactics and strategies that no peaceful race could imagine. And they had brought all of that knowledge to this battle. Across the battlefield, Admiral Tanaka watched from the bridge of the Retribution. Her fleet was performing exactly as planned. The Council ships were bigger and more heavily armed, but they were slow. They expected their enemies to fight in neat, predictable patterns. Humans did not fight predictably. Humans adapted. Humans improvised. Humans did whatever it took to win. Enemy reinforcements entering the system, reported Commander Weber. 2,000 ships. They will reach us in 40 minutes. Tanaka nodded. She had expected this. Signal all carriers. Launch the second wave. From the bellies of the human carriers, hundreds of smaller craft poured into space. They were boarding ships, each one carrying 50 Marines in powered armor. While the human warships kept the enemy fleet busy, these boarding parties would strike at the heart of the Council's command structure. Lieutenant Maria Santos was aboard one of these boarding ships. She was 24 years old, born on Earth after the massacre but raised on stories of it. Her parents had lost friends on Kepler 442b. Her grandmother had cried every night for a year. Maria did not feel fear as her ship approached the Rithkari flagship. She felt only cold, focused anger. 30 seconds to contact, the pilot announced. Brace for impact. The boarding ship did not dock gently. It fired explosive harpoons into the enemy hull, then used them to pull itself into the metal like a bullet into flesh. The hull screamed as it was torn open. Air rushed out. The Marines rushed in. The Rithkari crew were not prepared for close combat. Why would they be? No civilized species had fought hand-to-hand in 10,000 years. It was primitive. It was barbaric. It was exactly what the humans were trained for. Maria's power armor made her 3 times stronger than a normal human. Her weapon was a plasma rifle with a built-in blade for close quarters. She moved through the enemy ship like death itself. Her squad behind her. The Rithkari were large and strong. Their stone bodies could shrug off most weapons. But human plasma rifles were not most weapons. They were designed specifically to crack stone. Forward! Maria shouted. Bridge is 2 decks up. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle. Gunfire, explosions, screams in alien languages. She did not look back. Her mission was clear. Take the bridge. Disable the ship. On the Crusher of Worlds, Commander Tharlox received reports of boarding parties throughout his ship. Human soldiers were fighting their way through his corridors, killing everyone they found. His security teams were being overwhelmed. This is impossible, he said. They are savages. They fight like animals. Commander, his first officer said, voice trembling. The humans. They will not stop. We have killed dozens of them, but more keep coming, and they do not seem to care about dying. This was the truth that the Council had never understood. Humans did not fear death the way other species did. They saw it as a price to be paid. They were willing to sacrifice themselves if it meant victory. They would ram their ships into enemy vessels. They would charge into certain death if it meant taking the enemy with them. On the carrier Indomitable, Captain James Chen faced exactly this choice. His ship had lost engines. His weapons were destroyed. Enemy vessels were closing in to finish him off. He could surrender. He could save his crew. The Council would probably take prisoners. Chen looked at the crew members around him. Young men and women who had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not come back. They looked at him with steady eyes. They knew what he was thinking. Sir, his weapons officer said quietly, we still have reactor control. Chen nodded slowly. The reactor was designed with a self-destruct sequence. If he overloaded it, the explosion would vaporize everything within 50 kilometers. 3 Rithkari battleships were within that radius. All hands, Chen announced over the ship's speakers. Abandon ship. Get to the escape pods. You have 3 minutes. Captain, his first officer said. Someone has to stay behind to trigger the overload manually. I know. Chen sat down in his command chair. I will do it. Go. Sir, that is an order. Go. Tell the Admiral we did our duty. 3 minutes later, the Indomitable exploded. The blast destroyed 2 of the 3 Rithkari battleships. The third was crippled beyond repair. Stories like this happened across the battlefield. Human crews fought to the last person. Human pilots flew suicide runs. Human Marines died standing, rather than surrender. The Council fleet, despite its numbers, began to break. They were not losing because of technology or tactics. They were losing because the humans simply wanted it more. 6 hours after the battle began, it was over. The Council fleet was destroyed. 3,000 ships, reduced to floating debris. The human losses were heavy. Nearly 400 ships, tens of thousands of dead. But they had won. Admiral Tanaka stood on her bridge, looking at the wreckage that filled space around Nexus Prime Station. She felt no joy, only a grim satisfaction. Signal the station, she ordered. Tell the Council that we are coming aboard. We have things to discuss. The human fleet reformed. The survivors gathered together, wounded but unbroken. They had done the impossible. They had defeated the greatest military force in galactic history, and now, they would collect what they were owed. Revenge was sweet, but justice would be sweeter still. The Grand Chamber had never been silent like this. For 60,000 years, this room had been filled with the sounds of power, debates and arguments, proclamations and decrees, the voices of the 12 elder species deciding the fate of the galaxy. Now there was only silence, and fear, and the sound of human boots on the crystal floor. Admiral Yuki Tanaka walked into the chamber with 20 Marines at her back. She had removed her helmet, and her gray-streaked hair was tied back in a tight knot. Her face showed no emotion. Her eyes showed everything. The 12 thrones were occupied, but the beings who sat on them were not the proud rulers they had been just hours ago. High Arbiter Velthrix seemed to have aged 100 years. His bronze shell looked dull and tired. His 8 eyes were fixed on the human woman who approached him. Lord Krathax of the Rithkari Dominion was not present. His flagship had been destroyed in the battle. His body was somewhere in the debris field, floating with the remains of his crew. Tanaka stopped in the center of the chamber. She looked around at the thrones, at the crystal walls, at the beauty and majesty of a place that had ruled the galaxy since before humanity had discovered fire. You know why I am here, she said. Velthrix nodded slowly. You have won. You have proven your strength. What happens now? It was the question everyone in the chamber wanted answered. The human fleet surrounded Nexus Prime Station. Human Marines controlled all the docking bays and corridors. The Council was completely at humanity's mercy. That depends, Tanaka said, on what kind of species you think we are. Ambassador Thessia of the Velnari Collective leaned forward on her throne. Her silver eyes searched Tanaka's face. What do you mean? 5 years ago, you killed 18 million of our people. You expected us to cry, to beg, to submit. Tanaka's voice was steady. Instead, we built a fleet. We came here. We destroyed the greatest military force in galactic history. Now you are afraid that we will do to you what you did to us. She paused. The silence stretched on. You are afraid, Tanaka continued, that we will burn your worlds, kill your children, turn your species into ash and dust. You think this is what we came here to do? Velthrix's voice was barely a whisper. Is it not? For a long moment, Tanaka did not answer. She thought about Kepler 442b. She thought about the 18 million dead. She thought about the years of preparation, the anger that had driven her and her crew across the stars. Then she thought about something else, a conversation she had with her grandfather when she was a little girl. He had fought in a war long ago, on Earth, in a conflict that had killed millions. After the war ended, his country had been occupied by its former enemies. They could have been cruel. They could have taken revenge. Instead, they had helped rebuild. They had turned enemies into friends. And decades later, Her grandfather's country had become one of the most peaceful on Earth. "No," Tanaka said finally. "That is not what we came here to do." Relief washed across the faces of the council members. Some of them closed their eyes. Others let out breaths they had been holding. "We came here," Tanaka continued, "to show you what we are capable of, to prove that humanity will never be controlled, to make sure you understand that if you ever threaten our worlds again, we will return. And next time, we will not stop at your fleet." She reached into her uniform and pulled out a data tablet. She walked forward and placed it on the floor in front of Velthrix's throne. "These are our terms. Read them." Velthrix picked up the tablet. As he read, his eyes widened. He passed it to the council member next to him, who passed it to the next. "You want a seat on this council?" Velthrix asked. "Equal to any elder race," Tanaka confirmed. "We will not be a protectorate. We will not be servants. We will be partners. And the reparations? For the colonies you destroyed, for the families who lost loved ones, for the suffering you caused." Tanaka's voice hardened. "You cannot bring back the dead, but you can help the living. What about—" Thesia hesitated. "What about those responsible for the massacre? The commanders who gave the orders? The council members who authorized the attack?" Tanaka looked around the chamber. She knew that some of the beings in this room had voted for the destruction of the human colonies. She knew that they deserved to face justice, but she also knew something else. Killing them would feel good. It would satisfy the anger that burned in her heart, but it would not bring peace. It would only create more anger, more revenge, more cycles of violence. "Your people will judge them," she said. "We expect trials. We expect transparency. We expect the truth to be known across the galaxy. But we will not demand their blood." Velthrix stared at her. "I do not understand. You have the power to destroy us. Why show mercy?" Tanaka met his 8 eyes with her too. "Because we are not you. Because we know what it means to lose. Because we remember what it was like to be powerless." She took a step forward, "And because proving that we are better than you matters more than revenge." The council deliberated for less than an hour. They had no real choice, and they knew it. The human fleet could destroy Nexus Prime Station with a single command. Accepting humanity's terms was not generosity. It was survival. The documents were signed. The agreements were sealed. Humanity was officially recognized as a sovereign power, equal to the elder species who had ruled the galaxy for millennia. But more than that had changed. In the weeks that followed, news of the Battle of Nexus Prime spread across the galaxy. Other protectorate species watched the recordings with amazement. A young species had done the impossible. They had challenged the council and won. Some of these species began to ask questions. If humans could demand freedom, why could they not? If the elder races were not as powerful as they seemed, why should the younger species serve them? The old order began to crack. Humanity did not encourage rebellion. They did not have to. Their example was enough. Species that had been silent for centuries began to speak. Worlds that had been obedient began to demand rights. In the Grand Chamber, the 12 thrones became 13. Admiral Tanaka did not take the seat herself. She returned to Earth, where she was welcomed as a hero. The seat went to Ambassador David Kim, a diplomat who believed in talking more than fighting. The council members discovered that humans were difficult allies. They asked uncomfortable questions. They challenged ancient laws. They defended species who had no one else to speak for them. And they never forgot. Every year, on the anniversary of the massacre, humanity held a moment of silence. Ships throughout the galaxy stopped. Humans bowed their heads. They remembered the 18 million who had died so that their species could be free. In the great archive of the Galactic Council, the entry for humanity was rewritten many times over the following centuries, but one line remained constant, a warning to any species who might think of threatening Earth again. It read, "Species classification, apex predator, origin, death world, class 12, status, full council member, special note, do not provoke." They remember everything. Admiral Yuki Tanaka lived for another 40 years. She spent her final days in a small house near the ocean in Japan, watching the waves and thinking about all that had happened. On the day she died, every human ship in the galaxy lowered its flag. The woman who had led humanity to freedom was gone, but her legacy lived on. In the stars that humans now traveled freely. in the worlds where human children played without fear, in the galaxy that had learned, at last, that some species should never be underestimated, humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through submission, not through servitude, through fire, through blood, through the absolute refusal to be anything less than free, and that was how it would always be.